So let's move on now to this first panel. We forgot to mention quite a few things at the beginning. We forgot to ask you to please silence your mobile phones to avoid interference with the simultaneous interpretation. Also, please feel free to pick up an interpretation device from the entrance if you would like to listen to the translation. There will be, as a follow-up, a course for students here, those who are hoping to get these academic credits from assisting this event. You need to sign in and out, and there will be an evaluation process afterwards. We have a lot to get through this afternoon, so we will try to keep on track. We would like you, please, to be punctual. Thank you to those of you who have travelled here today from other islands, from different public administrations, the Director General of the Energy Transition, Mr. Montañez, representatives from city halls, rural associations, local associations, support groups for different projects, administration of the Environment Department of the island government. Thank you for your collaboration and for being here. I'm going to very briefly introduce this panel. We have given it the title Canary Islands Energy Transition and Climate Emergency, Challenges and Strategies for Adaptation and Mitigation in the Face of Climate Change. There are three main lines that we will look at. What is the impact of climate change and the policies for mitigation and adaptation that are needed? Then, what are the challenges for this energy transition that is so necessary in islands such as these? As we heard earlier, we depend a great deal here on fossil fuels. And finally, we want to talk about governance and citizen participation in this climate emergency. Carmelo León González, professor. He is now a professor at the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. He was a professor at the University of Manchester. He was a visiting professor at Berkeley University in the US. And now he is focusing on applied economics. He has a very long academic career and has authored more than 100 scientific articles and has been involved in more than 40 projects, many of great importance for Agenda 2030. In recent works, he's talked about the impact of climate change in the future of the islands and in other European archipelagos. This recent work involved more than 50 countries and many research institutes. So thank you, Carmela, and welcome to the panel. As I was saying, we have a wonderful panel of experts here today who are working on this issue of the climate emergency, climate change, renewables. The first speaker will be Xavier Lavandeira. He is a professor of economics at the University of Vigo, and he's director of a research group in social sciences in Galicia, ECOBAS, and he's a member of the MIT Research Institute Elcano in Madrid as well. And he's a specialist in all of these issues to do with climate policy. He has participated in the IPCC reports, Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, and he is a real point of reference when it comes to climate policies. He has done a great deal to raise awareness and to educate about this issue, and it's an honour to have him here with us. We will also be hearing from, in second place, Nuria Albet. She is a doctor of physics. She also holds a degree in physics, in nanotechnology. She is an expert in renewable energy sources. She has a wide-ranging experience looking at how to activate citizen participation to promote renewables by creating energy communities, La Palma Renewables, for instance, and La Bonita is another one in La Palma. She's doing very important and very interesting work, which gives us an example of how we can activate rapid transition in terms of energy. Finally, we'll be hearing from Noemi Padron. She is a full professor at the University of La Laguna in the Department of Economics, and she is important expert in environmental policy. She has specialized in many different fields, waste, energy, water. She is able to understand the current problems and apply her research to it. She is an expert at looking at these interactions between humans and nature. She took her PhD at the University Juan Carlos in Madrid. She's also worked on environmental economics. She has a great deal of training and is an excellent person to talk to us about the challenges that we are facing now in terms of climate. So I hope, as Dr. Minelli said, we will be enlightened now by what we are going to hear about how complex this landscape is and how interrelated all of these different global factors are. So, I will now ask each of the speakers to take the mic, and we will have the chance to take some questions from the floor afterwards. So please go ahead, Javier. Well, thank you, Carmelo, for the very kind words. It's an honour to be here at the University of La Laguna and taking part in this conference, especially given that it's also been organised in part by the University of Las Palmas. I was able to give a seminar this morning and yesterday as well in Las Palmas, so I'm really making the most of the trip. So I would like to give you a brief introduction, around 5 minutes, about the challenges that I see. I'm an economist, so I will talk about my field, but I will also try to give a more general perspective before we look at the more specific situation here in the Canary Islands. I think the first message to give is that we have a worrying situation. We have high levels of greenhouse gas emissions. We haven't been able to reduce them. On the contrary, in recent decades, they have continued to increase. Our international approach isn't working. The 1990s Kyoto Protocol failed. And our current legislation and goals in this regard aren't working either. Of course, I'm referring here to the Paris Agreement. Unfortunately, last year we went over 1.5 degrees temperature increase compared to pre-industrial level, and this was a key marker identified in the Paris Agreement. Scientists, I'm sure many people here are experts that know a lot more about this than I do, but scientists tend to agree that this may set off a series of very worrying consequences. We saw what happened earlier in Valencia at the end of last year as a tragic example of these events that will become more commonplace. So, originally, of course, we talked about a 2-degree maximum temperature increase, ideally 1.5 degrees. The IPCC continues to insist that it's very important that we maintain this temperature increase, that it must be less than 2 degrees. We talk about these tipping points, and once these points have been passed, the effects of this global warming worsen at a greater speed. The way of controlling this temperature increase for us at the moment is, of course, controlling the emissions. But we may reach a point at which this link is broken between emissions and effects of climate change. And that will be a very, very worrying moment. That's something that worries us as economists a great deal right now, that these temperature increases, which we're already seeing, may take us into a much more serious situation. And of course, we're talking about averages here, average temperature increases. There may be peaks and troughs, particularly in places like the Canary Islands in the summertime. There may be huge temperature increases when compared to pre-industrial levels. So, what do we have to do? Well, adapt. Public policies are key here. We also have to take our own responsibility as individuals, also businesses. And this is going to be very key. As I said, if we reach the point when we are no longer able to mitigate the effects of this change. Mitigation, of course, is the reduction of our emissions. Adaptation is something different. If mitigation no longer works, if problems become so serious, then we will need to focus more on adaptation. So, when it comes to mitigation, then, we have to reduce our emissions by using less fossil fuels. I think this is something that we need to keep very clear. The vast majority of our emissions come from the energy sector, and the vast majority of those emissions come from fossil fuels. If we look at the consumption of energy around the world, in terms of gas, petrol, etc., this demand is continuing to increase. So we need to work a lot more on renewables. We need to ensure that they are able to replace our fossil fuels. This is a key aspect, and we also need to reduce our energy consumption. considerably. We consume a great deal and increasingly more energy, and it's unlikely that we'll be able to meet that need in its entirety with renewables. So we need to reduce our demands. So this energy component is key. So that's my general introduction. For the young people in the audience here, I'm afraid it's not very good news. You are the ones who are going to suffer the effects of this. But we live in a country that has tools at its disposal. We have an international agreement, the Paris Agreement, which includes all of the countries in the world. These are voluntary commitments and voluntary policies that are designed to meet those goals. There's no need then to find new protocols. Rather, if we see that what we have in place isn't enough, then we will adapt it. We're looking today that the average temperature increase will probably be around 2.5 degrees Celsius. When we, of course, look at the potential impact of this, it's quite catastrophic. So, what do we do here in the Canary Islands, Spain, and the European Union when it comes to the Paris Agreement? This is mostly work that's done by the European Union. They design policies. They do this work on our behalf. They function as one country, let's say. And they have very ambitious goals. That they are the most ambitious goals that have ever existed in this area. Nevertheless, fossil fuels continue to be extracted and burnt in the European Union. We see that oil rather, and natural gas are quite stable in terms of the amount that is being burnt in the European Union. And renewables, of course, are increasing. In the European Union, then, our goal is to be a decarbonised society by 2050. But we have a whole set of objectives running up to that. 2030, our 2030 goal is very ambitious. We want to have 55% less emissions compared to 1990. We're not there yet, but we're moving in the right direction. But we have some obstacles, in particular the transport sector. This is what's holding us back, and we need to do a lot more work there. So what has the European Union done then so far? Well, they've set up a Fit for 55 package. And this is just around the corner. It's in 5 years' time. So this Fit for 55 then is very similar to previous climate policies that have been put in place in the past 20 years in the European Union. European policies are focused on incentives, putting a price on carbon. It's looking at around 80 euros per tonne of CO2. This is what European companies are having to pay at the moment for their emissions. And we think this is a good step forward. We think that the price should or will be around $100 per tonne of CO2 emissions. So agriculture, transport sectors, there are a few that represent half of European emissions, and these are our key problematic areas. So, of course, these policies are going to have a big impact in the Canary Islands. The Commission has strengthened this carbon market that exists, and it's created a new carbon exchange market that will affect the transport sector in particular. This is something that's been approved, and it will bring great change in the coming months when it comes to fuel prices. In this last package, there is another important component, especially given the current international context with the return of Trump. So this is the CBAM, the carbon borders. So the idea is that if we import these fossil fuels from countries that don't have strong carbon pricing policies like we do, well, there will be an extra price to pay. This is a way of de-incentivizing imports from countries that haven't made these climate pledges. Countries like China, India, even the US. And this is a way of incentivizing these countries to introduce similar policies. We can't be paying 80 euros per tonne of CO2 here when in Morocco there's no price attached to those emissions at all. This is the carbon border adjustment mechanism. There is also a problem with industrial lobbies, social, territorial lobbies, and they lose out when policies like these are introduced. Naomi will perhaps talk about inequalities. Of course, when the price goes up for energy and basic products, this can lead to, of course, behavioural change that is necessary, but it can also bring about inequity. We also have a whole series of global challenges. This new, very complex geopolitical landscape that we have today, and what impact this will have on our climate and energy policies. There will be rollbacks, I'm sure. Here in the European Parliament and the Commission, we are facing a greater pushback when it comes to policies like these compared to the previous mandate. There are nevertheless still majorities who are in favour of these types of policies. The new, very negative international context, though, might not necessarily be that negative. What we want to do is, of course, reduce our dependence on the Americans, the Russians, natural gas. We want to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels. The greater energy autonomy that we have, the better. Second, we also want to be more competitive with countries that are pushing for a change in the rules of play. So to be competitive, we need to design new technologies, new ways of combining our energy mix to be sustainable, etc. I think this is going to be important for our future as well. So I'm perhaps giving you a bit of a mixed message here. Yes, we have huge challenges, huge problems. We're not alone here, although we may feel alone. In fact, Europe seems to be the torchbearer for this issue. I hope we will be able to resist this pushback from the rest of the world that appears to be going in the opposite direction. I hope we'll be able to grasp the opportunity that this also represents. the impact of climate change will be huge across the world. China, I would like to say they are doing a lot as well. China, up to last year, has installed more renewable energy infrastructure than the rest of the world combined. And they're supplying most of our renewables technology, our solar panels, etc. So it's important to be aware of that. Also, there's everything that's happening with electric cars. They're producing a great deal, and they're helping these vehicles to be more widely used in other economies. I'm sure I've spoken for far longer than 5 minutes, so apologies. Nuria, please go ahead. Voy bien. No sé a qué hora empecé.
Creo que a las 1:15, así que en 2 minutos hemos hecho media hora.
Dale.
Bueno, primero agradecer a todas las instituciones.
First and foremost, thank you to the organizers, to the institutions. I believe it's key to have this kind of opportunities, and it's also quite interesting to have so many economists close to me. I don't really like all economists, but I like these ones because we can speak about real economy as a physicist, I believe. There are many challenges. That has been a great introduction made by my colleague. There are climate challenges, of course, and every time I'm asked to speak about this, it's getting more and more difficult for me to do so. The situation is becoming more complex by the day. We can see stuff happening, like, for example, in the USA. Now it seems like war is closing up to us, and we are quite in a difficult situation. 5 years ago, we might not have been able to even imagine that we would reach this point. And well, I wonder, I have many questions, and of course I am thankful for these conferences being about sustainability. And as Michael said before, what does that mean? What does sustainable mean here in Europe? We are quite an exception in the world, as my colleagues just said. And I wonder what sustainable means in European terms. I'm not really sure about it being the same definition as Michael just shared, that we are respecting the planet's boundaries and limits, or whether it's more about security, geopolitics, within a territory that has no petrol. We need to wonder about that. We might lose everything we have if we just try and seize this security, the safety that we think we have. So it's important to have this acceleration, this baby drill from Trump. I won't be saying anything positive about him, but he's almost a cartoonish version of the system. Stuff that wasn't quite clear in the past that has become clearer now. And Donald Trump says, if you want to make America great again, his MAGA slogan, then you need energy. In order to create this energy, they need to burn the planet. So in the end, we have this big power that is fighting with another big power, the Russia, and then we have China. And in order to be a part of that fight, they need to burn out fossil fuels. However, we need to stop. We need to rethink about why and how we're doing things and how we need to change our economic model. And within a world where leaders seem to follow a path that might lead to disaster. However, personally, I wonder what should we do? If we have this sort of leaders making those decisions for us that are leading to extinction, what role do we play as citizens? And who can contribute for that common good instead of for private interests, as many leaders seem to be doing instead? What's most important to me is for the basis of economics to be, if it's energy, well, to understand that the person that has the power of that energy, that is in charge, will have a lot of decision-making power to change the whole model. In La Palma, for some time now, we have understood that we need electricity and energy to be in the hands of the people, of the local administrations, of those who believe this change to sustainability. If we don't achieve that, I've been hearing about some news in Europe where we will be forcing to open up some mines. The energy transition requires some of these rare materials. And we have seen some examples where the indigenous communities, like the Sunnis, live. And now they're being told that they are forced to open up those mines. And, well, it seems like colonization isn't something from the past, but it's actually still very present within our country. We see how extremism, fascism is growing. And I think it's because of how we're doing things, because we're not stopping to rethink everything. That's why we have a lot of problems with inequalities. In La Palma, we studied about energy poverty, and we learned that 27% of the local people couldn't control the temperatures within their own homes due to lack of resources, of income. That's one of the reasons, but also the lack of housing quality. Usually the walls just let all the heat within the homes escape, and so the quality of that housing isn't up to par either. And now the solutions we have, for example, the social bond needs quite some improving. It's just putting some tape on the bucket, hoping for it not to overflow. We have seen people have those needs that are not accessing the social bonds. And the people who do, maybe people who don't really need it as much, like people with families with many children, that can't get those social payments. So if we see that even when we try to find solutions, these solutions don't really work, maybe we have to redesign everything. In La Palma, it's quite a charming corner of the world. It seems like a piece of an island where nothing ever happens, but instead, I would say the contrary. There are many interesting things happening there. We have a sustainable energy model. We have been able to sign some agreements with the local administrations, with the city, with the island council, where we tried to bet on an island that would be 100% renewable, and that governance would be in the hands of the people living on that island. The decisions relating to renewables should be responding to what the local people want. Now, the island government funded this project, and for the past 6 years we've been working on that. We're working on energy poverty. We have a committee where we try and coordinate all the stakeholders. And for the past 3 years, we also created an energetic community. I really liked what Michael said, how to rethink a system within the system, from being inside the system. And we have a cooperative, a charity, that has some of these rules that would work in a sustainable world without overstepping all Earth's limits. We are a charity which doesn't imply that we are not creating income. We have 8 stations of self-consumption. We have many plans that I can share later on.
Más de 200, no, estamos llevando 250 personas socias que nos dicen que
We
la cooperativa
have over 250 partners that tell us that we are one of the best co-ops within the islands. And being a charity, what does that imply? Well, that what we're working towards is to have this manifestum of the electron, to invest all of the money earned on that project. We also try and integrate the most vulnerable people. And we didn't want to wait for things to happen. We are trying to make them happen ourselves. Of course, there have been many mistakes along the way, but we're also taking some learnings from that. We're trying to answer to all these challenges and create communities where people can trust each other, where they can be empowered and feel able to be a part of that change. And I think I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Que nada, dice que hay como unas diapos nuevas, pues lo puse en el drive.
A ver si llego a tiempo.
Buenas tardes a todos. A mí también me gustaría agradecer la invitación que me han hecho.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would also like to thank Carlos Fernandez, my colleagues, Carmelo, for having me within this exceptional debate. Exceptional because we're not only friends meeting and sharing our year-long experience, we also have Xavier. When I went back to the USA, I worked on the pollution of different markets. I was starting to study pollution in different markets, and he was working on the taxing system of the environment. And at that time, we were still learning how this financial incentives work and what that rising problem was of this climate crisis. And of course, Nuria, who's carrying out a fantastic work on this decarbonization project. I'm an economist myself. I've been a teacher, professor here at the University of La Laguna. I've also worked internationally. I started in the United States. And maybe we need to just, lose some tension now. We need to relax. We are in an academic setting. And of course, we need to exchange information and knowledge. I arrived at Madison, Wisconsin. It was very cold. I was used to the temperatures here in the Canary Islands. And what I wanted to do was to work with some researchers that were working on the water markets in the USA. Water management in the Canary Islands, it was quite a unique setting in comparison to the rest of Europe, and we wanted to learn about this institutional economy they already had in the United States. And when I started working on that, I discovered that Madison, Milwaukee, there were like two companies, two paper production companies, and in that process they would spill some of non-polluting but still oxygen-demanding materials to the rivers. The government had created some rules on how much they could generate, how much they could spill into that river. So they had some emission limits. These were two very different companies. One was more modern, less polluting. The other one was more traditional, more polluting. So they decided to agree on exchanging or sharing these rights that those rules were giving them. That was one of the first examples of pollution exchange rights. Instead of decarbonizing the processes, you can offer them standards that could be then converted into permits and achieve environmental goals at a cheaper cost. This was one of the first emissions trading schemes. The prosperity of emissions rights has been mainly due to political will and decisions. We spoke about it this morning. Creating taxes in Europe requires voting the green light from all the member states. However, we could create a directive on emissions rights, and for that we wouldn't need a green light from everyone, just from most of the member states. Well, that's a bit of my history with the emissions trading schemes regarding decarbonization, as Xavier was mentioning before, which not only happens in Europe but also internationally. We also have regional markets, national markets like in China, amongst others. Well, today I won't be talking about these markets, but I wanted to break the ice somewhere. Today I will be talking about the results and some reflections on a recent work we carried out with my colleague, Mr. Carmelo León. We carried out these projects for the government of the Canary Islands, and they relate to the transition process to a more decarbonized society, a more resilient society, and of course also a more sustainable one. So this is about the rules approved between 2022 and 2023, this law on climate change and energy transition in the Canaries, as well as the Canarian strategy on climate action. Canary Islands is one of the regions in Europe with less renewable presence, with less production of renewable energies. Although in the 70s, in the 80s, Canary Islands was a model, a leader, really, in wind power as well as solar power. The research centers were leaders, pioneers in the development of these technologies. However, due to different issues, now we are no leaders anymore. We have been working on this for decades, but most of our goals and projects have failed during these past decades. We aren't able to accomplish everything we decided on doing. Europe, however, has to achieve some goals, for example, for 2050. So the Canary Islands try always to be ahead of the curve and achieve that, for example, by 2040. The problem with all of this energy planning, I won't be drilling it down to the details, but I would like to offer some food for thought. There are many barriers, important barriers, that we've been facing for decades now in the Canary Islands. They are quite rooted within our economic model, within the Canary Islands economic system. The incentive structure here in the Canary Islands lead to decisions made by stakeholders. For example, what car should I buy? Should I get this new piece of clothing or not? Should I start this company, or should I invest in a company, or should I not? Financial incentives would really determine whether we follow one path or another, as well as our economic development, and of course also our carbon footprint. All this planning is also also has to understand this transition we have to carry out in the next 20, 30, 40 years. When talking about transition within the energy transition model, we often hear this phrase of leaving no one behind. Of course, it would be quite easy for 10% of the people to have an e-car, and all other people would have no car at all. Problem solved. However, we have to understand that we need a solution that is for everyone. More so for people who are more vulnerable, might not be able to access or afford some part of the solution, whether that might be consumers or workers who are maybe working at a company that is outdated or within a model that is outdated.
Bueno, las principales barreras que presenta el sistema económico canario
So the main barriers we have to overcome in the Canary Islands are the same as in the rest of Europe. There are some subsidies for different types of fuels, for carbon emissions. We also have agricultural funds that are being invested in order to support and help all the different member states. We also have this per se framework where we try to help territories that have some sort of singularity, not only here in the Canary Islands but also in Central America. We also have a self-providing regime that is quite useful, because all of these different funds, these support schemes, will help us to be up to par with Spain or with Europe, that are within the continent, that have these macro-scale economies. We are quite small here as islands, but we're also fragmented, and we are quite far from the continent. We are also receiving around €1 million every year to produce energy, fuel-based energy that we need for our desalination plants. A big part of the water we consume here is coming from those plants. Each island has their own system, but we're also trying to offer some help for local people to be able to fly to mainland Europe, so they can also move around the country like someone from Galicia, from Madrid or Barcelona could do. We have many different support schemes. I've written the VAT tax too, although we have a different one here in the islands. We also have some tax benefits, we have the RIC, we have all kinds of different taxing schemes aimed to help us. What we're trying to do is to achieve equity, to be able to start from to have the same starting point as other regions of Europe. However, imagine, we tell now to the Canary Islands, okay, stop, now you can become a lab. Don't follow into the steps of Madrid, Barcelona, or any other city. Look at your own resources, at your own human capital, and invent a new transition model with your own set of opportunities and singularities. What would that imply? I mean, something that Javier was already hinting on. The economic model won't allow to accelerate or transit in a reasonable way this path, because there are more social costs, there are more environmental costs than the exploitation of resources, which is ignoring the ecosystemic limits of our territories. Mainland Spain is not the same as the Canary Islands. We have places here where 1,000 people, not 50,000 or 100,000, but 1,000 people would already be more than enough to degrade a coastal area. We have to track back, we have to change. We are also very dependent on food imports, other sorts of imports. We're also depending on tourism, and we are also more vulnerable due to that. Now let me summarize.
Lo que va a ocurrir es que tenemos
So I'm running out
subvenciones
of
al
time.
transporte aéreo,
So we have
subvenciones
different
sobre los combustibles locales,
helping
pero ahora va a
schemes,
venir
support
Europa y va a
schemes,
poner un impuesto adicional o una
in
tasa
order to
adicional
fly to the
sobre los
mainland, in order
combustibles y además
to be able
de,
to move around the country.
descuento de
However,
residentes que
now
tenemos los
the
canarios,
European
pues vamos a
Union
tener
has
que
decided
pagar
that
por
we
los
should be
permisos de
paying more
emisión
for
del sistema de
carbon
transporte aéreo.
emissions,
O sea,
we should be
básicamente
paying
esto es
more
una
for
paradoja, es
using
una contradicción,
planes.
¿de acuerdo?
Now the people in the
No
Canary
podemos
Islands
pensar que el modelo
have to
va a
pay
dar un
more in
giro,
order to use that
¿vale?
sole method
Por
of
un lado,
transport they have.
tocándole,
So there
y
is
por
a
otro lado, es
paradox.
como darle
On
un
one hand, we're
tranquilizante
trying
y al mismo
to
tiempo un excitante.
help out, on the other, we're trying
Básicamente nos
to
vamos a volver
stop
locos.
it.
¿Qué es
So
lo
in the
que
end, we will
realmente, sale de
become
las
quite
encuestas que
crazy
realizamos
to the
a
situation, I believe,
stakeholders en el
according to
proceso de
the
transición
different
justa de Canarias?
surveys
Los
we
agentes
have sent
sociales,
or stakeholders. We have
representativos,
seen that
lo que
representative
lo que
stakeholders
revelan al fin y al cabo es que el proceso de transición tiene
see this
muchas
transition process
probabilidades de fracasar, no tiene los
as
mecanismos
a
adecuados para fracasar,
possible
y sobre todo está
failure,
generando
as it doesn't have the necessary mechanisms to be carried out successfully. Furthermore, there are different aspects that make it more difficult for it to become feasible, a sustainable solution. We continue handing out money to help, but then blocking some paths in order to decarbonize economies or most vulnerable people will be suffering from that. The support system to the most vulnerable people will be stripped from everything that has made it successful. What we need to do is to start assessing public policies for a just and sustainable transition. Well, this will be the last thing I say before I finish. I see Angel here. Regarding waste management, all these subsidies that are being handed out for these waste management schemes need to be have a holistic approach. I remember in the past that I had to go with my mother to buy something to the place where it was produced. However, now after just waiting a few days, I might be receiving a microchip from the other side of the world. I might be using it, and later on I might just be throwing it away. How do we deal with all this new waste that is getting to the islands? Instead of taking all of this waste away, we have 1.3 billion tons of waste that we need to export back to China or to the US. However, they won't be picking those up. They won't definitely not be funding that transport. So we need to change the way we've been dealing with this. Now, this responsibility, eco-embes, eco-video, all these responsibility schemes are national plans on national scale. And for the Canary Islands, we see that's one of the most difficult examples of waste recovery. They have just started some of the process due to different pressure points to really try and work on that, like the mainland Spain had already been doing. However, I believe that we need our own set of goals dealing with these extended consumer responsibility schemes. There's a new national rule on waste management. It's a national rule. And the conclusion of that route is that we will have to pay more. If I do not recycle, I will not get any sort of subsidy. I will be paying more for my waste. I will be paying more for the landfill. I will be paying more for that waste to be picked up and taken there. Nothing will have changed. The system will just remain as it is, because the social stakeholders, in which I include the administration as well as all the other stakeholders within the system, won't be encouraged to follow the right path by the incentives that we're receiving. The punishment that bad stakeholders, quote unquote, should be receiving is double the amount of that other regions will be receiving, and something we really need to take into account in order to find a new way of approaching sustainability. Thank you.
Really? Thank you, Naomi. So, we're going to have an open debate now. Feel free to ask your questions to the speakers. I think all three speakers have spoken a great deal about the specific situation of the Canary Islands now in the international context, the challenge of global policies, European Union policies, the problem to do with changes in behaviour, how to move forward with this energy transition. Naomi talked specifically about how to change the incentives that are in place, which currently don't seem to be working. They're not helping to accelerate this transition. What difficulties do we face here in the Canary Islands to speed up our energy transition? How can we innovate? How can we change perspectives regarding how we organize our energy system, our energy production? As Nuria said, perhaps with a model that focuses more on individual behavioral change and as we heard also from Nuria, all of these things traditionally have been in the hands of large-scale economic actors. Naomi talked about the European Union context. We, as a region, have a whole series of economic incentives because we are so far away from the rest of Europe. But that isn't helping us with our decarbonisation. So how can we accelerate our transition here? Is there a perfect recipe out there, an incentive mechanism that can help us to create this policy? It's hard to find the right tool. When we have multiple goals in mind, we of course need multiple tools. So let's perhaps reflect on this as our first question. Well, first and foremost, I'm not an expert in outermost regions or island regions. Noemi told a story that really stuck with me. It's as though we're taking tranquilizers and also stimulants at the same time. This isn't helping us to have clear goals and to be consistent with those goals. So distribution is key here. There are higher increasing costs that we're facing. So perhaps what I would say is we should try and use all of the tools that we have at our disposal to maintain these incentives for decarbonisation, more sustainable economies, while at the same time protecting homes, economic sectors. Of course, it's a complex situation. It's often a challenge here to make the most of economies of scale. There are a whole series of peculiarities here that make everything a little more difficult. In the White Book, which we didn't really talk about, although you mentioned it briefly in the introduction, we were asked by the government of Spain to write this White Book looking at tax issues. And we talked about how to create measures that lead to change without working to the detriment of vulnerable populations. So I think what we need to do is have clear goals and create measures that are social in nature. If we try to do everything at the same time, then we won't be able to achieve anything. Another thing I would like to mention, it's been mentioned earlier already by both of you, the Canary Islands is a place where things can be tested, and I think this is a positive thing. Lots of people say that Europe can't do anything else. China is doing their own thing, America too. I'm sure you've heard this idea from friends and colleagues that say we have too much legislation here. But that's not the right message. We need to continue legislating. Yes, we need more innovation, more competitivity, but what we're really trying to do is to give the world cheaper technology to progress as much as possible when it comes to building these technologies that we'll be able to later export. Climate change is a global problem. If we can help people in India, people in South America to adopt these technology, these techniques that we've developed, then this will be great. Like your project in La Palma. If we can scale these experiences up, then we'll be contributing a great deal to this global challenge. The carbon market has done well in Europe. It's developed a great deal. The Chinese have actually copied us in this area, and that's not a bad thing. They've copied it, it's working, and we have a national carbon market now. If only other countries would copy us too, because perhaps our role should be to offer these technologies, policies, experience to the rest of the world. And I think in this regard, the Canary Islands could play a very key role. There are things that we can do here that might not be possible to do elsewhere. Yes, some of our circumstances are negative. Perhaps we don't have the lobbies and the communities that have the strength to push things forward, but well, I think what you're talking about is this laboratory for experiments in the Canary Islands. So how can we then improve our waste management systems, to improve our relationship with the environment and our surroundings. Actually, Nuria's experience is a great example of a success story. It illustrates how we can encourage citizen participation, urgent citizen participation, when it comes to take-up of renewable technologies. We have finite human and natural resources here on our islands. Could you talk to us about the success factors in your project? I know you've worked very, very hard to achieve what you have. Well, yes. Just to say, first of all, Nuria isn't on her own. I work with a big community, and we are working very well together. I think everything that we've said up to now about these economic incentives is important, yes, but that's the framework. It needs to be implemented, executed. Perhaps you remember a few years ago, the electric system was changed. Rosa Quintana was talking about how we should be putting our washing machines on at night time, and people are still doing that, hoping to save money on their electricity bill, but they're actually not on that specific tiered electricity plan that was talked about in the media a few years ago. So that's a problem with application. Quite often, I feel like it's just a few of us that focus so much on this energy issue. I think what I'd like to share with you can be divided into two parts. We've worked a lot with professionals in culture, festivals, because a lot of these changes that we need to make as humans are often a little scary. And so we need to think about this in a more holistic way. How can we accept the situation that we're in, which is a difficult situation, and come out the other side empowered with energy to make a change? We have a book club, for example. That's my collective therapy. Every 2 weeks we read books about energy transition and climate change. Right now we're reading Ecotopia, which is a comic book series. So that's one important part. And then the other part is to do with participation, that we think is very important. And I've been working as an activist in this area. If we talk, for instance, about climate change as something that doesn't affect people in their day-to-day lives, then they're unlikely to participate. But if you talk to them about their electricity bill that lands on their doormat every month, then they're much more likely to be involved. We organise these meetings, and people come perhaps because they want to save money on their electricity bills, or simply because they want to change the technology that they're using. They hate Endesa, the electricity company, for instance, and they want to change. There's also this word dignity. We try to give back dignity to people that they've lost. Oftentimes we feel frustrated that we get this bill at the end of the month and we have to pay it. We have no choice, but we're empowering people. Now they do have a choice. So these are all very important processes. We don't have much time left, so I would like to invite the audience now to ask their questions.
Cierro la puerta.
Well, thank you for organising this conference, and thank you for inviting so many experts to talk with us. You were talking about optimism. There's something I think we should all keep in mind, especially those of us of a certain age, and that's 50, 60, 40 or 30 years. We managed things in a different way. With every decade that passes, we make improvements. We've improved what we eat, the things we wear, our freedoms, our information sources, our access to information. In the past, public libraries weren't well stocked. Nowadays, it's much easier to access training and education. So as a society, we need to continue to improve our well-being, of course. And right now, Europe, the Canary Islands, is trying to protect this well-being that we've worked so hard to ensure. Sustainability is a part of our personal and collective health. But let's be optimistic and reflect on all the progress we've made in the past 50 years. I'm sure that anyone sitting at the table. Do you have a question? No, it's just a reflection. I just want to give my opinion because I think it's important. I would like to invite the speakers at the table to perhaps give us a message of greater optimism. I would like to offer this optimism. I think we're much better off than we were in the past. Thank you. Any comments? Are any other questions? Economically speaking, I'm an economist as well. Well, first of all, thank you for your presentations. The current economic system is very concentrated on finance. There are monopolies in many sectors which take all of the decisions. So when we talk about a change of model, this rearmament that we're facing now is something that we're talking about a great deal. I think this is something that should be led by public communities. This is something that's very common in China. So these issues of financing and concentration are things that aren't spoken about very much. We talk a lot about climate change and this change of model, but not these other two facets. Nuria is talking about initiatives for European energy. This is a threat to the system because I am in theory able to create my own supply of electricity. I don't need a multinational business to install a network who has a headquarters in the other side of the world with thousands of servers. So that's why we need to think about this transition as a process of change. We sometimes have good news, bad news, but ultimately we're trying to, as you say, maintain our well-being in the long term. But with the current model, this isn't sustainable. Sustainable is a very economic term. We cannot allow ourselves to continue with the current quality of life that we have. We cannot continue to enjoy the goods and services as we are currently because we're creating great social and environmental cost. Perhaps not here, but elsewhere. People are suffering in order for us to enjoy this well-being. Future generations will as well suffer. We're sentencing them to a much lower quality of life than we ourselves are enjoying. So what we need to do is to evaluate the pillars, the main mechanisms, the incentives that exist in the current system to be able to redirect them, reducing environmental impact, but also including as many people as possible. In Michael's speech, he talked about lots of different dimensions, spirituality. We're also transforming our goals. What is well-being really? Is it having a car and a house and a motorbike? Maybe we need to change these criteria of well-being, criteria of health. Talk more about prevention, because the current health system and healthcare system isn't sustainable. In the US, of course, it's not, but here, neither. So what we need to do is to identify the levers, the mechanisms. So training. How do universities need to change? This university is old-fashioned, but also Princeton, Harvard, Berkeley, all of these universities around the world are in crisis. They need to change the training that they offer young people to be able to take part in this transformation process. And that's what we're doing right here. We're reflecting on this topic. It's going to take decades, maybe even generations, to change this path of growth. Can I perhaps offer one very specific example? We also have one question online, which is very practical. The question is, what would be the legal framework that could help people to produce and consume their own energy? What's the legal framework? Well, it's perhaps not that concrete. I mean, we have what we have. We can't go into all the details here now, for instance. The distances have changed from 2 kilometers to 500 meters, things like this, specifics. But generally speaking, we're not the worst in the EU when it comes to self-consumption, auto-consumption of energy. I'd like to give this example, a positive example of something that's happening right now. It's taken us a year to put in place this collective self-consumption system of energy. It should have been a lot quicker than this. There is a now state-level cooperative called Sommer Energia, and in a few days they activated the local collectives. We had been fighting for a month for these people to connect to this network. Some of them had run out of patience and had gone elsewhere to other providers. Well, thank you so much to the whole panel. Alto, lo están en Rosario, alto.